For a long stretch of the company's history, pay-per-view names were a huge part of how World Wrestling Entertainment sold its identity. The event title itself could tell you the tone of the night before a single wrestler walked out. Unforgiven sounded dangerous. Armageddon sounded apocalyptic. Cyber Sunday sounded interactive and gimmick-driven. Fully Loaded sounded chaotic. These were not just calendar placeholders, they were branding tools, and for years the company used them to make monthly events feel like distinct worlds instead of interchangeable stops on a schedule. That is why defunct pay-per-view events are so interesting. When an event name disappears and never comes back, it usually means more than a logo being retired. It usually means the company has changed how it wants to present its premium calendar. Looking back at the company's archived event history, you can see entire groups of old event brands that belonged very specifically to certain eras and then vanished for good, including names like Breakdown, Rock Bottom, St. Valentine's Day Massacre, Fully Loaded, Rebellion, Insurrection, Invasion, Unforgiven, Armageddon, Breaking Point, Bragging Rights, Over the Limit, Fatal 4-Way, Capital Punishment, Great Balls of Fire, Stomping Grounds, and Day One. Some of those events disappeared because they were built for a very specific creative moment. Invasion only made sense in the aftermath of the company's takeover of World Championship Wrestling and ECW. Cyber Sunday and Taboo Tuesday were tied to a period when fan voting and interactive television felt like major hooks. Breaking Point was built around submission-themed branding. Bragging Rights was tied directly to brand warfare. Once the creative trend behind those events cooled off, the event names lost their reason to exist. They were not timeless concepts, they were era concepts. Others disappeared because the company eventually moved away from a monthly calendar filled with heavily themed names. In older eras, a large part of the appeal was that almost every event had its own identity. By the time the company had a broader streaming library and a more modern premium live event strategy, there was less need for every show to have such an aggressive standalone concept. The company's archived pay-per-view history shows just how crowded that older naming system became. At the same time, its current event and premium live event pages reflect a much narrower active lineup today. That contrast tells the story clearly. The company shifted from a long menu of themed event brands toward a smaller set of more durable event identities. That helps explain why names like Unforgiven and Armageddon still feel important even though they are gone. They were not one-off curiosities. They ran for years and became tied to entire stretches of company history. Official event archives still preserve their match histories in detail, which is part of why fans remember them so strongly now. They were recurring traditions once, but the fact that they now live mainly as archive pages instead of active annual events shows how completely the company changed course. There is also a branding lesson in which names survived and which did not. Event names that were broad enough to remain flexible had a better chance of lasting or returning in some form. Event names that were too tied to a gimmick, a one-time angle, or a very specific tone were much easier to leave behind. Great Balls of Fire and Stomping Grounds are good examples of that. They were memorable names, but not the kind of event identities the company seemed interested in building into permanent pillars. The same goes for Capital Punishment and Fatal 4-Way. They felt like themed stops, not foundational institutions. And that is really the story of defunct pay-per-view events in World Wrestling Entertainment. They are markers of different philosophies. Some belong to the era when the company wanted every month to feel like its own distinct spectacle. Some belong to experiments that only made sense for a short time. Some belong to international expansion periods, like Rebellion and Insurrection. And some belong to concepts that were simply too narrow to survive once the company streamlined its premium event strategy. In the end, defunct pay-per-view events matter because they reveal how much the company used to rely on themed branding to create atmosphere. Those names were part of the texture of older eras. They helped fans remember time periods, rivalries, and entire stretches of the calendar. When they disappeared, the company did not just lose event titles. It lost pieces of the old monthly personality that once made the schedule feel louder, stranger, and more varied. And that is exactly why fans still talk about them.